Okay, so I think we can all agree that From Software perfected video game boss design. Through each and every one of their games they show that they can create hard but fair boss fights that are also really fun because of how fast paced some of them are. But today I am not talking about good Souls bosses, today I'm talking about bosses from different Souls-likes, mainly Lies of P, and I will point out some of the biggest problems with these fights, and I will make sure everyone understands the difference between good and bad boss design. If you ever played a Souls game, there is a pretty high chance you can recognize the different types of boss fights. Firstly, we have a humanoid boss fights that include bosses that take a form of a human and that are usually pretty fast, and examples of these kind of fights are the Orphan of Kos and Lady Maria. Secondly, we have spectacle boss fights that consist of bosses that aren't too hard and are designed just to look epic. And at last we have monster boss fights that consist of bosses that are 10 times bigger than you, and they can range from really hard to really generic and boring. Okay, so at first we need to set a standard for good boss design, and we will do by choosing one of From Software's best mid-game bosses in Morgott the Omen King. You already fight a weaker version of Morgott in the first hour of the game, so his moveset stays pretty similar to the boss you meet in Limgrave, except once you get him down to half health he decides to enter his second phase where he is faster and he has a couple new attacks and one that can erase your whole health bar if you aren't careful. However, even though he can be hard, he has to be hard in a fair way by having all of his moves being well telegraphed and by not having any bullshit undodgeable attacks or by having attacks that are too fast to react to. Now this is exactly how a good video game boss should look like, but what happens when the game developer doesn't really care about these traits and wants to make bosses just so they can be hard, and the only thing that makes the boss unique is being hard? You get Lies of P. Now I will be honest with everyone, I didn't finish Lies of P yet, but I'm pretty sure I am close to finishing the game, and I can comfortably say that my opinion on this game's bosses is mixed, and that's because they are either going to be some of my favorite bosses ever, like the Archbishop for example, who in my opinion is the perfect boss that shows you how other bosses will play out in this game. However, that's not the case, since after the King of Puppets the game takes a horrific downward spiral where the boss quality drops and all of the bosses start feeling bland and you get bored of fighting them. Now this is a complaint that I would have never had about a game like Dark Souls 3, where every single boss has its own gimmick without feeling like a gimmick fight. The best example of this are the Abyss Watchers, who have a gimmick in the first phase but an actual one-on-one fight in the second phase. However, in Lies of P every boss feels like a bullet sponge, and the difference between the first and second phase is almost non-existent, excluding good bosses like the King of Puppets. But now we have to answer the question, why do game developers make these bosses so unfun and boring while From Software's bosses are critically acclaimed while using the same formula? Well, the answer to that question is very simple, and it's the fact that From Software wants to make fun bosses, not difficult ones, and this is something other game developers can't understand, because when they look at the success of Souls games they only think that these games sold well because they were hard, but that completely misses the point of why these games are considered to be so good. The thing that made these games so good was the atmosphere, the creative level design, the well thought out enemy placement, and most importantly the enjoyability of the bosses. The game that people consider to have the best bosses is Dark Souls 3, and that game is by far the easiest Souls game, but people still enjoyed it not because it was easy but because it was well designed and fun. These games don't need to be easy to be fun, they can also be hard. Let's take Sekiro as an example, which is considered to be one of the hardest games ever, but the bosses are still considered to be top tier, and this is because even though they might be hard they are also fair, and when you die it feels like your fault, not the game's fault because of some unfair attack that deleted your entire health bar. And this is something these small game developers can't understand about these games because they scale their boss difficulty with Souls veteran games, not new players, and just so new players can feel comfortable they give them a summon that makes the boss 10 times easier and ruins the whole point of the game. In the end, I'm not here to gatekeep and tell people what's the true way of fighting bosses like a person with no life, but even though it sounds like I hated Lies of P and all other Souls-likes, I still have to say that this isn't a rant but rather a critique on some of the flaws that could ruin good games like Lies of P. And just so people don't get me wrong, I don't hate these games, I just want them to be better and get out of the shadow of Dark Souls and Bloodborne.
You never see it coming.